And we're live, hopefully. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Roll for Combat Live. I'm here today with Stephanie from Stephanie
We're coming
Plays
up on a
Games.
major fundraising deadline, and
we
there
are
aren't
here to
many
talk
more
about
between now and the
improvising rules
election.
in
So I
a
am
rules-heavy game like D&D or Pathfinder. So when you're playing a rules-light game, obviously in many of those games you have to improvise a ruling for, almost anything except for the things that are directly covered in those rules. But in a rules heavy game like D&D or Pathfinder, there's a lot of rules in the book, and
So many rules.
there's rules for almost everything that you can think of, except for the corner cases that your PCs think of that were not in those rules. And so it can get a little trickier, because in games where there weren't rules anyway, it does leave you kind of awash where you don't have a lot of guide rails necessarily, but at least it lets you know, I know I'm supposed to be making this ruling. Whereas in a game with a lot of rules, you might feel, well, if I spent a lot of time and poured through the book, eventually I might find a rule for this, and what if my ruling is not the same? So I think that's part of the conundrum that we're going to try to solve.
Yeah. No, I think it gets hard because I feel like when there's so many rules, it does have that board game element where we don't want to be wrong, especially because like players put a lot of time and investment and like try to make the optimal choices or to move the story, and we want to reward them and not punish them for being creative.
Yeah, absolutely. And so if we might feel like if we make a ruling that is like too punishing to the players, or maybe in some cases that it's too lenient, and the weird little improvised thing about kicking a barrel into the enemies turns out to be so much stronger than anything else, that PCs just bring like 50 barrels and are just kicking barrels into the enemies every time. So
That's all barrel farming. Yeah, you now have PCs who want a barrel farm.
They play Donkey Kong and just throw barrels down.
Oh my gosh. I actually would reward that. Maybe I'm the wrong person to have on today's episode.
I mean, and maybe you should. That's part of this topic. Part of the topic is that when you're dealing with improvisation, especially in a rules-heavy game like D&D or Pathfinder, you should figure out where your players are at. That's really important. That's the first thing you need to do with your group. So if your group is thinking, okay, let's like mostly go with the rules that are in there, but we want to allow some cool ideas, but we also don't want, maybe they say that we also don't want those cool ideas to become like ubiquitous meme thing that you just do instead of the regular rules.
Yeah, and I especially think that's what like groups who do care a lot kind of about the story and the gameplay. Like some groups are more Monty Python-esque than other ones, so that's what things going a little sideways isn't the end-all be-all to a group like that. But
right.
Yeah, no, you don't want to like mess things up when people especially really try to like push the limits within the rules and then are like, oh cool, I didn't actually have to care about what fireball meant at all if I could just do all of these things with it. So it's really, really hard, and I do think I agree it's very group dependent is kind of where I start with things, is I'm like, okay, like how experienced are the players? So it's like how much do they already know about what they're trying to do, and are they trying to kind of be like goofy, or is it just like, I don't know my options yet, can I try XYZ? And you don't want to like stamp out earnestness. I feel like that's what earnest
on a major
creativity
fundraising deadline
is something I really like to cultivate in games, so
and
I
there
do a
aren't
lot
many
of
more between
improvised rulings for people.
Yeah, I'd say absolutely. You need to know where your group is at, because they could actually be much more extreme than the middle grounds that we've been talking about here. Maybe they absolutely want everything to be by the letter, and it doesn't matter if you spend 10 minutes looking things up every time you're not sure. That's kind of extreme. But I've seen groups that are like that, and that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, no, that's what I
wants.
do think it's some people come more from that board game-esque, like, no house rules, because I grew up in a house rules type of house where we play Monopoly a certain way, and it drives certain friends insane. So I can only imagine with D&D being in a group where, like, the fit isn't as good in D&D or Pathfinder or something, with all of these kind of side rulings that you don't always have to use, but if they come up, it can be really, like, kind of like upsetting to certain types of players. And I do think it's like it's valid. Like if they're expecting a certain type of game and that's at odds with what you're doing, like I do think it is kind of one of those things. I do think that the idea of pausing and looking things up is really like I feel like almost discouraged. Like breaking immersion, I feel like isn't, at least once again at my tables and my experience, isn't the end all be all. And it's probably because we don't have it every 5 rounds of something. It's not constant. But like if I don't know what I'm doing and I know I have that player who really cares about me getting it right, like I'll be like, hey, snack break, like let me look this up really quick and we'll get back into it, because I'd rather them have a good experience than to have like one small thing really derail it for them when it's like, cool, we can just be like, we aren't sure, let me check.
Right. Another way you can handle this situation, if you do have the group that's very, very hard on the rules, and I think we're going to move past the extreme after we cover some tips for it, but you could consider deputizing some of the players if like 1 or 2 or 3 of them are hard on the rules, and be like, what I'd like you to do is look this up. And for now, we're going to go with this thing, but that I'm saying. But if that like really messes you up or screws things over compared to what you find out the right thing is while you're looking it up after your turn, we will retcon a little bit.
And that's what, like, I definitely agree with that. Like, I think there's kind of a pressure on being called like the game master or the dungeon master. Like, since I'm someone who's relatively speaking newer to TTRPGs, I've only been playing for 2 years. It's I think it can be overwhelming to some people, the idea of you're supposed to be like this end all be all like tome of information. And that's really, really hard to do. So it's okay to be like, hey, I might get this wrong. You're in charge of looking this up. We can retcon it. It's okay. It's okay to be wrong as the person that's like kind of in charge of the game. Like people respect you a lot more if you can just say oops and then move on.
Once you have a social contract to make it a group effort to look for things, then that makes it so that not all the pressure is on you to look for those things. And that can work well in a very, very rulesy group.
Yes. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Especially, I feel like Pathfinder even more so because there's so many different types of options you can build out. At least D&D, it's like if you've been playing long enough, I feel like you have a better chance of grasping weird fringe cases. But Pathfinder, I feel like takes that times 20 from what I've seen. So I don't know how you feel about that, Mark.
I would say that Pathfinder has just so many options that you're likely to find something if you keep going long enough that has an unusual interaction. Now, obviously, we try to design things future-proofingly so that they would work as well as you can. But when you have enough stuff, it's just going to happen.
Yeah, and that's what, like, I think the way I have a tendency to view games and the rules for them is more like scaffolding, where I think a lot of times what players care more about than the actual ruling is consistency in the rulings. Because I know, I'm like, I've been at tables where that has like made me so angry, even on something as simple as skills checks, where it's like, okay, why does this person get to just do what they want and I have persuasion checks and I'm a low roller? And it's like, okay, but why? Tell me why.
Consistency and predictability are very important. I want to get into those. Let's do the opposite extreme first. So we talked about the extreme where your social contract at your table is all the rules have to be from the book as much as possible, and how to try to do some table management for that. Now, your group might be on the other side. It's like, I don't even care what's in there. We don't care if the improvised action is so strong that people do it all the time. We don't care if somebody has a feat that already let them do that because they took the feat, but you're just letting everybody do it for free. Or like, where the balance is at. We just kind of want to, like, hang out and, eat some pretzels and just do whatever cool thing comes to mind at the time and kick back.
Yeah, and I think, again, so much of that is if you have a whole group of those people, I think a lot of that becomes like, that's not a problem if you can all agree on it. And that's why I think most of that stress comes from that friction of the two competing groups, because, like, That's what I think. Games like that can actually be a ton of fun, and sometimes one of the things I do, because I have played some one shots, especially because I feel like one shot energy sometimes is a little looser too. So I'll have people that are more like that, and you'll have someone with a build who's like, "Hey, I picked these things," and so sometimes what I'll switch to is like giving them advantage on the roll. Like I'll still try to find some way to honor choices that are made if I can. And again, those are people where once again they're not gonna be as nitpicky. Like, why did they get advantage? It's like I don't know, they're all just going with it. So
Yeah.
that's what like I try to still reward player choices if I can find an alternative way if we're getting a little loosey goosey in terms of who's trying and doing what.
Yeah, it's very important to reward player choices. I would even go so far as to say, if you want to have the completely rules lawyery group, you probably can do fine in D&D and Pathfinder with them. If you have the completely loosey-goosey group, I would suggest another game system. If it's
Me too.
completely loosey-goosey and that's all the players, there's something else you could be playing that might actually be better for your group. If you're good at handling those situations, which can be a problem in some of those other games if you're not, and your players all want it.
Yeah. And that's what I think, like, there is kind of like this misconception that rules light can't be serious or can't be deadly. And like, I was definitely one of those people before, like, I started playing more rules light systems. Because I jumped into other systems really, really quickly. Like, I'm a board game person, so to me, there was never the idea of like, oh, you only play D&D because you started with D&D. I'm like, no, I play everything that I can get anyone to run or play in. Like, I will play literally everything. But like, Dragonbane is one where I'm like, oh, this is cute and fun, and like combat in that is super deadly, but it's also super simple, and so much of it is you just kind of trying to come up with more story related like combat concepts, but it's like you have to be smart. And
Yeah.
so I do think like things like that can flow a lot better for loosey goosey groups because they can still be silly but have real stakes, and I think it makes it I make it's fun with groups like that, I think.
Yeah. So I want to, now that we talked about the two big extremes, go back to something you said, which is the most important point for making these kind of improvised rulings, which is you need to honor player choices, but also sort of player expectations, choices that they made based on what they expected from the rest of the game. That is where consistency comes in. That is where predictability comes in. And that is also where, as Miles mentioned in the chat, having other people who may have chosen an option to specifically make them better at that one aspect of the game comes in. I think that's all under the aegis of honoring the player's choices and their expectations.
Yeah. And that's what like I am a huge session zero person. I know like not all tables need to do it, especially if it's a table you've played at before where you kind of know the vibe that other people are bringing. But like I think so much disappointment can be kind of avoided if you know the type of people you are playing with. Because I think you can get, even just when talking about character concepts, you can get a vibe for who's going to be maybe a problem person for you as an individual if you're someone who is more rulesy and cares a lot about kind of specialization as a player. Because I'm someone who it's like I've built out like weird, what I wanted to be weird persuasive characters. I've had little forest gnomes where I wanted to be like, that's a weird puppy, like this is a puppy, guys. And I've had DMs where if I would have realized how serious they take certain things and would have been like, everything's with disadvantage on my character built specifically to do this, like I would have had a lot more fun because I would have just played a barbarian where it's I hit it or I didn't. Like,
Right. So let me give an example of a situation that happened to me in a game that was bad for improvising rulings, so that we can like kind of look through it, piece it together, and figure out
yeah.
what went wrong with this ruling. So I was playing in a group, and the GM liked using batch initiative. Now, I'm not a fan of batch initiative where 12 enemies can all roll a natural 20 and ambush the party and all go first, or roll a natural 1 and all be dead like before they go. I'd rather put those 12 enemies either individually or maybe in groups so that I don't have to roll
3 or
12.
4.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right? So already the GM was using batch initiative, and you know what? That's their prerogative to do that if they're gonna use it.
Yeah.
In this was a like a organized play game, but that it was allowed. But
Yeah.
then there were a lot of heavy hitting enemies, and they kind of all went at a certain point, which was after my cleric. So I
Ooh.
said, I'm going to delay. That's something that was allowed in the game system at the time, which is not Pathfinder 2 or D&D 5e. This was a while ago that this happened. That lets me wait and then come back in at any time. I told the GM, I'm going to delay so that if we get badly hurt, like, partway through this barrage of high damaging enemies, I can come in and heal so that our players don't go down.
So you could do cleric things.
Yeah, right? So about like 5 of the 12 enemies had gone, and one of the players was in dire straits. So I said, all right, great. I'm going to come out of delay, which I delayed to do, and I'm going to heal him. And he's like, well, no, because I have it as a batch, and you're not allowed to interrupt the batch. You can come after all 12 of them go.
Now, did you tell when you were holding, did you like explicitly be like, hey, okay.
I explained why I was holding.
Wild.
And
Okay.
he's like, you have to wait until they're all done. I'm like, so essentially you had me skip my entire turn then, right? Because if I didn't go before the enemies and I can't go until after them, that's equivalent to just skipping one turn. It was like, why didn't you tell me at the time that that's what you were going to do? I didn't like the ruling, and I was curious why it wasn't explained at the time. They're like, well, I wasn't thinking about it then. I was like, okay. And we kept playing, but I wasn't very thrilled with this ruling.
You feel like shorted. It's like it feels bad. And like I feel like moments like that are so good to just be like, okay, this was a miscommunication. Because we are human beings. We are not a little video game robot churning out calculations. And you say, I'll let it happen this round. In future rounds, we will not interrupt batches. It's just so easy to be like, okay, this thing happened, or you made choices thinking this was gonna work out a certain way. Like, or even just be like rolling to see if you go between like now or like end up a little later towards the end of the batch. Like literally anything other than like, oops, no. Like I feel like it's at least someone trying to meet someone in the middle. Because again, we're all humans. It's okay to be like, oops, I messed up. I didn't understand what you, the player, was asking. Like,
yeah. And this is just an example of why expectations are so important. The player, you're as the GM, you are like kind of the window into this magical world. You're the eyes, the ears, you're every sensory organ, because you're telling them what they see, what they hear, how things work, and trying to get your player's mindset into the logic of this game and this world. And when there's a mismatch between what you are going to do and what they expected to happen with your ruling, that can be a problem. In fact, I'd say that the problem with inconsistency, the main problem with inconsistency, is the problem of expectations. If they expected something based on the last time you rolled it, and then you did something else, or if you let someone do something and you make it sound like you think it was a good idea, and then you're like, oh, but you know what? You're rolling against like against a 30 with a +6, so you fail, and now look at how bad you are. It was like, maybe you should have gave a little clue that it was hard.
Yeah, and that's what like I think sometimes people worry about being too metagamey, but again, there's so many chances for miscommunications in games like this. And I think being explicit doesn't hurt the concept of immersion at all, because what you have is people making choices then about something their character would know. It's like, okay, you would know it's this hard. You know you're trying to pull off something that is almost impossible. And then it's okay if you still try, because I'm the type of person who's like, cool, I historically roll super low, but today maybe it'll be my nat 20. Like,
never tell me the odds.
That's it. It's just having, like you said, having those expectations and having everyone on the same page helps so much. And I think one of the other things is being like, hey, I have a problem, and making it kind of comfortable for players to pipe up if they think something isn't like being consistent or doesn't like they really don't understand why it doesn't work the way they expect something's gonna work. And I tell everyone in my session 0, I'm like, I make mistakes. Especially once again, I've only been playing all of these games for 2 years. I'm going to make mistakes, and that's okay. Please don't sit there and be like bummed out. I'm not gonna be like, because I said so. I will either tell you the reasoning or I'll be like, oops, I messed up. Can we fix this?
Right. Absolutely. And so I would say that in general, when it comes to these expectations, when you have this mismatch, it's going to create an issue, and it's going to create tension. It's going to create a little bit of friction. And so it's better to make sure you have open communication at the start where you can talk about things. It's better if you say some things in advance. So to give a kind of callback to when Stephanie was in the game that I ran of Pathfinder 2, a lot of the times what people were trying were a fairly easy DC. But one time, the champion attempted a athletics checks to climb that was actually fairly challenging. It was still like not impossible. I think he needed like to roll a 13 or 14 on the D20 plus his bonus to make it. So he was pretty good at athletics. So I just told him, you take a look at that wall and you think it might be fairly challenging to climb it. And he's like, okay, going for it anyway. And he made it.
Yeah. And that's probably one of those things, like playing for groups of GMs is always better because we're still going to go. But that's what some players will change their tactics. And it's important to know. And sometimes one of the things I do in a similar vein is I kind of foreshadow what the consequence looks like. Because sometimes people are like, oh yeah, I'm just going to fail at it. And it's like, no. It looks hard to climb and it's a 8-story fall. You're at level 1. It's not a great thing. So I'll try to be a little bit more explicit. I'll be like, yeah, it's an 8-story fall. It is really going to hurt. It could even kill you or something. And then if they really want to make that choice, I'm like, yeah, let's go.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what sometimes, especially new players, because I play with a lot of new players and try and bring people in, they don't understand the consequences all the times. And I think it can be easier for people who've played for a while to like overlook and be like, of course something was going to happen because we're used to them, like the things happening already.
100%. And for me, I felt like it was important to describe it at that point because everyone who had been playing along so far, almost all of the DCs were either 12, 13, or 15. And so they had been seeing 14 succeed sometimes, 16 succeed sometimes. And the fact that I was going to call for a 20 on that wall because it was a little harder to climb, I felt like it was worth mentioning because it was different than what they experienced up till then. If he had gotten an 18 after spending actions in combat to climb and failed, it would have been like, wait a minute, nothing else has failed on an 18 up until this point.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one of the valuable elements of sort of talking about it. It didn't bring anyone out of immersion. I wasn't giving exact numbers or anything like that. It makes sense that someone who's climbed a lot of walls, who's trained in athletics, probably would know if it was going to be hard.
Yeah, no, and that's what I really think people stress too much about giving too much information, but especially when there's a chance for kind of that mismatch in communication, I think that's when I always err on giving too much rather than too little.
The "are you sure you might fall 8 stories" is very important because you might be worried and be like, I don't want to seem like I'm like secretly forcing the players to do it my way. I want to give them their options, and I already mentioned the 8 stories in the box text, but let me tell you, they probably didn't hear that. Or even if they did, there's a chance they didn't. You are their only eyes and ears and everything into this world. And so you want to give them every benefit of the doubt. Like, I've heard of GMs who, like, describe the situation and there's a cliff, like, 10 feet to the north. And then the player, someone's like, okay, so I'm going to move forward 20 feet and then it's a, wait a minute, you move forward 20 feet and you fall off the cliff to your death. And it's like, no one would do that. That's not realistic. You should be like, hold on. Now, I know I just told you this, but I want to make sure you know. But after 10 feet, there's a cliff. do you still want to move forward 20 feet? And they'd be like, yeah, I'm going to Wile E. Coyote it or something. I don't know. And be like, okay, now it's on you. But it's on me as the GM if I don't tell them and remind them, because their character exists in the world and can see this cliff.
And I think that's one of the mismatches in communication styles between GMs and players is we can see it all in our mind because we're the ones running the situation. Like, we are like the referee, we are the world builder, we are like helping guide them through this story. So we have more information than any player ever will. So yeah, it doesn't make sense to just do weird gotchas because they didn't understand exactly where something was positioned or like the stakes of something that their character would know. Their character can see that cliff just because the player can't imagine it. And that's what there are so many different types of kind of learning and communication styles where I kind of like in our game, I talked about I love theater of the mind combat. It is what I prefer because as a player, I feel like I can be more creative. A lot of times, like especially with the right GM, but I have a lot of friends who are the type of people who can't picture anything. So even with visual aids, like it's harder for them and they really love grid combat. So it's really one of those things where it's important to kind of like have player intent, what is character knowledge, and just making sure everyone's on the same page.
You need to know what immerses your players more. A lot of players are more immersed when they have their minis and they're on the grid top down. I actually get pulled out because I feel like Clash of the Titans, where now I'm the gods and I'm moving these little pawns, and that's not me anymore if I'm looking at it from the top down. But that's a little weird, though. I've talked about it on streams before, and I've had other people in the chat be like, I'm like you, Mark. We're in this small minority together. But
I know, we really are, because I'm that person, too. Like, I enjoy minis, but it's because I'm like, wow, this person painted this so cool. Like, it takes me out of it.
Yeah.
I'm like, it's cute board game design type things where I'm just like, wow, this is so nice. But it takes me creatively and immersively very much out of the game. Because that's what, like, I have a very strong, like, picture imagination.
Right.
So that is, like, what I am good at doing. But yeah, you have to meet so many different types of people somewhere in the middle.
Let's see if you're all the way in the same place. Now, for me, the better the miniature is, the better painted, the more it looks exactly right, the more I get pulled out to the God's Eye view. And if it's like a Skittle, it's less of a problem for me because it's just, this is an abstract representation.
Well, that's what I do for my players, because that's what, like, I do have some that aren't hardcore, like, I need grids, but just need some sort of visual thing, is I kind of create a quick, like, zone map so that it's like, okay, you would need your movement to move into this zone. Everything here is within, like, your range, and that's what I'll use things like Skittles and stuff for that, and that's what I have no problem with that, because it's like, I can still be like, this is what a goblin looks like, and, like, put on my picture brain.
Yep, and now on the opposite side from us, all the way on the other side, are players like Sticky Slapshot in the chat who have aphantasia. And you obviously need to make sure that you're running and ruling things in a way that works for your group. If you have even one player with aphantasia, in my opinion, as the person who's in the opposite side, you've gotta put everything so they can see it, because I can still see it when I get pulled out of the game. It just reduces one quality of enjoyment, whereas for aphantasia...
And there's so many things other than combat that you're doing, so that's what I wholeheartedly agree, and that's what when I play with that person, I always have at least a grid. Even if I don't have the time to make something pretty and cute, I can get a grid out and make sure that they feel included. And I do think that's one of those things where... Shoot, I lost it. There was something you said that my brain pinged. I'll find it in 10 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, no worries. We can come back to it later. So, when it comes to delivering those expectations and delivering that consistency, I feel that having a sort of a shared known baseline for improvisation that you show the players in advance. And obviously, not everything can follow whatever this baseline improvisation guidelines are, but they can look at it and say, oh, this is what my kind of standard baseline is, can help you a lot. Now, Pathfinder 2 has one in one of the books that's a suggestion for, like, adjudicating a new idea. Dungeons & Dragons, less so. GMs are more encouraged to come up with their own baseline for rulings on that. But the Pathfinder 2 basic adjudication guidelines, I think, can be sort of used to come up with a set of guidelines that you would use something similar for D&D 5e if you wanted to. So in Pathfinder 2, the basics are, if someone wants to do a quick task during combat, it can take one of their actions, or maybe two if it's not something they would repeat constantly multiple times on their turn. So I'd say the 5e equivalent of that might be, if someone wants to do a small thing on their turn, it could be a bonus action. If it should take their whole main turn, it could be an action. Maybe if it's even more minor than that, it's one of those free interacts that you can do. And so the second one for Pathfinder 2 is, if you're not sure what kind of action a task should use, look for a similar basic action in the rules. And if you don't find one, then you can make up your own undefined action with traits or other similar things on it. And I think in D&D you can do the same thing.
Yeah, and that's what, like, I definitely do a lot of that. I try to find, whenever I'm improvising something, I try to find the closest thing I can to what kind of check I think it would be, and usually use that as a stand-in. I usually, like, I just do a quick check and I'm like, does that sound good? Because if they're like, no, I think this would be survival instead of nature because XYZ. A lot of times players know their stuff better than we can because there are usually enough players with enough different things that it's hard to keep track unless you're very, very well versed in a rules memorizer type of person. But I always err on the side of, when it's an earnest, well-meaning player, I err on the side of yes and generosity, where it's like if they have a reason they think it should be something, they honestly believe that. They're not just trying to be like, I have a +7, I'm trying to do my best finagling into having the better chance. But a lot of players are just like, oh, I imagine it this way, the words say this about this skill, and I'm more likely to say, yeah, at least this time. I'm like, I will sometimes note things down and be like, we might revisit that later, to let them know that I'm like, I'll let you have it, but it could be different in the future. But yeah, I err on the side of yes and being generous with my assessment because I usually feel like that's the most fun.
Absolutely. And if you're making a set of guidelines, you might even put that into your set. If you're making one for the players to see, it's like, here are my general ruling guidelines that you might expect with me. If it's a new group or your session 0, you might say, I'm probably going to err on the side of yes, and we'll come back later if that turned out to have been a problem. And that's a great thing to include on there. Let's see, the next one for Pathfinder is, if two sides are opposed, have one roll against the other's DC, which would be 10 plus the modifier of the other. Pathfinder does not suggest having both roll and then see who gets the higher total, except for initiative. And it says usually the character who rolls is the one who is acting right now, because you actually do have an advantage when you're rolling against 10 plus their modifier, because first of all, beating the DC happens on a tie. And second of all, the actual average results for them would be 10.5. So the fact that you gave it 10 instead of 11 means that it is an advantage to the one who's rolling, with the exception of saving throws where the person who's not acting can roll those. So you could use something like that in D&D. I think in D&D opposed rolls are used somewhat more often.
Yeah,
but
for sure. And that's what, especially, like, I don't know, I play barbarians pretty frequently. So that involves a lot of opposed rolls, and I'll sometimes use that for other related types of things where someone doesn't want something to happen. That's always a really good one to kind of use as an improvised thing. Let the dice work it out.
Yep. So the next one is, if an effect gives, a little bit of raising or lower the chance of success, you could grant a +1 circumstance bonus or a -1 circumstance penalty. Maybe bigger if it's a very big situation. Now, in D&D, that would be probably advantage or disadvantage, which is a lot more of a swing than the +1 or the -1, but there's so many ways to gain it, and you can't gain it twice, that it kind of, like, it works out.
It sure is swingy. Unless you're me, it's always under 10.
Oh... So the next one in Pathfinder 2 for improvising is, if you're not sure how difficult a significant challenge should be, use the DC of the party's level. Now, there aren't really level-based DCs in D&D, but there's just sort of the simple set of DCs. Pathfinder has those too, but it's sometimes easier to use the level of the party as a default, because then you know exactly where to go.
That's interesting. So how do party levels differ from individual levels?
Well, usually in Pathfinder 2, you would not have individual characters of a different level, but in
Okay.
organized play environment, there needed to be rules for that. And
Okay.
so there's just like a DC that organized play uses in general that is based on a formula of what characters were brought in that tries to take into account the fact that lower level characters are going to contribute a lot less than a higher level character, like sometimes
Okay.
twice as much for the higher level one.
Interesting. I was unfamiliar with that.
Yeah. So there's a question from someone from chat who says, "Can either of us elaborate on things we struggle with doing or conceiving because of perspectives such as Mark's God in the clouds?" So for me, it makes it a little harder to role play my character effectively because it constantly draws me out of being that character and being in the place. So I'll feel a little like sometimes that could be used to a good thing. Like if I was getting too nervous or anxious because the GM was too good at horror, I will feel less afraid when I'm me suddenly and I'm not the character anymore.
Are
So,
you an anti-horror person?
no, I'm not an anti-horror
Okay, I
person
was
at
just
all.
wondering. I have some friends who are very horror is not their genre, and it is very much mine. So,
I have a lot of fun with horror. I'm saying that like if you have
yeah,
ratcheted the tension too high
yeah, it's
for
good
some
to.
reason and you want to dial it back, for me, one way to do that is actually to put on a grid where you're showing the little minis. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm not that character. This random miniature is, especially if it's a very good mini
Yeah,
that looks just like my character.
and
And
I
so it's
think,
not always bad, but it
yeah,
sometimes is bad. What about you?
yeah. I think for me, the problem pops up a lot more as a player than as a GM
Yes.
because as a player, it's like you've seen in the Pathfinder game you ran for us. I do like to play little weirdos, so I do like to look for like what's not the vocalized option. It's not like attack or do this. And so I feel like kind of that God in the Clouds effect brings me back into board game spaces where I'm thinking only within the system, not thinking in a role play sense. Because it's like playing a weird little dream rabbit. I'm like, what would I be like? Would I really attack this person even if it was the plan? I'm like, I'd be very excited about what they were cooking, and I'll make weirder choices. And with a GM like you who can do that and move the story forward, that's a lot of fun for me as a player. So that's what whenever I kind of have more minis, more battle map settings, I have a tendency to think more within the box. And it takes a lot more effort for me to kind of snap myself out of that.
That makes
So
sense.
not as big of a issue compared to people that cannot see what I'm talking about and then have a lot more frustration. So much
Right.
smaller issue than the other way around.
Yeah.
But
Both of us, it's a smaller issue. I think that's why we both agreed immediately. If you have us at the table and one person with
yeah,
Avantasia, even if we're both at the table, you should
yeah,
do it the way for the person who
yeah,
can't picture the scene.
yeah.
Don't
It's a
worry about
lot more
us.
debilitating to have that happening than like, oh, I'm not role playing as much.
Yeah. So let's take a look at some of the other set baselines that they have in Pathfinder 2 and see which ones of them could apply to 5e if you were creating your own little manifesto for your players of how
Oh yeah,
your
I call them
adjudication goes.
Franken games. I run Franken games almost exclusively. I love playing and tinkering with mechanics. So
Franken games. So let's see. The next one is if you're making up a brand new effect, creatures should probably be incapacitated or killed by it only on a critical success or a critically failed saving throw. Well, that you can't really do in D&D as much. I have seen some things that are like if you fail by 5 or more, this other thing happens, but it's just not as standardized as in Pathfinder.
for sure, I do also err into things not instant killing regardless. I
Yeah,
feel
it's
like
just
that's
not fun.
usually anticlimactic. Like
It's just like,
it's
yeah,
only
your
really
character's
cool if
dead.
yeah, hooray! Yeah, I think there's lots of different types of stakes anyways that people can use. So
There's so many other stakes. Death is a high stake, don't get me wrong. But there's
yeah,
so many other stakes that can prolong the drama and cause other interesting things to happen.
Yeah, and that's what like you said, I think interesting is always the thing. I'm like sometimes death is the interesting thing, and I'm okay with that. And that's what I'm someone who I tell all my players from the get-go, like I don't do like your character cannot die. I don't care if you do not like that. If you do not, we are probably not a good match. You do not want to play games with me because I like real stakes. But that being said, I do think there's so many other things at different points in the story, like a curse would be more interesting. Like, okay, what does it look like if they're maimed? Like, what is their life like? Like, it depends on the story, on the character, and what they have going. But yeah, there's just so many things where death is only one of many stakes, so instant death is usually bland to me.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from that. Let's see. The next one, which we kind of got into when we were talking about choosing a similar action, was if you don't know what kind of check to use for something that wouldn't automatically succeed when you spend the action, pick the most appropriate skill. If no other skill applies and you're recalling knowledge, you can use a lore skill. Well, we don't have those exactly in D&D, but I think that's a very reasonable approach to take in both D&D and Pathfinder too.
Yeah, and that's what sometimes I even call, like, I give them the choice between like 2 or 3 skills that would fit so that, they can feel like, oh, okay, well, I think it would be this one because X, Y, Z. And they can feel like good about it instead of like, it's this one. You have to do it.
Right. So the next one is use the character's daily preparations as the time to reset anything that lasts roughly a day. So that one's good, and you can use right after the long rest for D&D, because in some older editions and games, there would just be things that last 24 hours. So it'd be like, well, I cast this one just before lunch yesterday, I guess, and then you'd be like keeping track of this like calendar of the day and when you cast the different spells, or be like,
all of us do that, don't we, Mark?
Yeah.
We all have our little timetable.
There you go. Well, Stephanie, the night before I rested, I cast mind blanks on everybody in the party, and then they lasted 24 hours. So then I went to sleep, and the next morning I just prepared a bunch of new spells, and now the spells from yesterday are still active for the next 8 or 16 hours, and so we're gonna be fine.
Although someone could argue that with me. That's what, like I said, I'm pretty flexible, so I'm like, sometimes I'm gonna say that's what I always thought my flexibility would get me in more trouble than it has. It actually usually gets my players in more trouble because they feel confident because they're like, okay, cool, I got basically an extra spell. And so they'll be a little bit more loosey-goosey and be like, yeah, I think we're gonna get all of this stuff done, no problem. And so it's kind of like giving them just enough leash to kind of give themselves a problem.
Yeah.
So that's another reason I say yes a lot. I'm like, yeah, if you're doing creative things, yeah, you have a plan. I'd love to see how that plan turns out for you.
Yeah. It gets interesting. Like in Pathfinder 1, it was just, you had to keep the timetable. And my group would just cast long duration spells that were either extended using meta magic rods or just already last 24 hours that would last through the sleep, and they would have out like an entire day's worth of buff spells that were not counted against their slots for the next day, and they would do that every time. So the question is, like, does it was explicitly allowed in that system, but when does it stop being creative and just start being just like
annoying
standard operating procedure?
Yeah, and I do think that's the thing, is to remember as the DM, sometimes it's one of those things where I'm like, okay, I kind of put characters or players in charge of things. I'm like, if you guys want all of this stuff metered out, you are going to be the ones taking care of it. I'll like occasionally be like, hey, are you keeping track? Hey, are you keeping track? Oh, what? You're not keeping track? Like, that's why we're not doing this. But luckily no one in my parties ever wants to keep track of more things. They're much more happy to do, yes, things reset at long rests.
Well, fortunately in Pathfinder 2, there aren't nearly as many buff spells as there were back in the day. In 3.5 D&D or in Pathfinder 1.
Yeah.
So let's see, there's 2 more of these basic principles that were there. These are just in the 15th page of the like the GM book for Pathfinder 2. The next one is when a character accomplishes something noteworthy that don't have rules for experience, award them experience for an accomplishment when they do it.
I mean, I feel like that's a whole debate in itself because I'm more of a milestone person than an experience.
Milestones are great, but we actually had this discussion internally at Paizo when we were designing Pathfinder 2.
Yep.
And I think a lot of us like milestones. At least one person was just like very vociferously like pro milestone and anti XP. But in the end, the idea was, if you make a really robust XP system that the people who like XP can use, it's very easy to go milestone from that. Whereas if you don't do it and you just say, oh, it's milestone, then the people who would have liked XP are left adrift and they have to figure out some way to do it with XP.
For sure. My XP stuff is pure laziness, honestly. Also, I talked with Ryan at Verdigris Table recently. I run very weird combat, so it's pure laziness on my part.
Fair enough. So Sticky Slapshot gave a super chat for $5. Thank you for helping me on my path to being a better GM.
Hey, hey. Oh, I was gonna say, I recognize that name.
Probably one of your viewers who's come over to
That's
check
very
out what's going
sweet of
on.
them. Yeah, that's it. They're a frequent flyer. That's what I'll call them. It's very sweet of them. They're very nice.
All right, so last one from the Pathfinder set. When the PCs fail at a task, look for a way they might fail forward, meaning the story moves forward with a negative consequence rather than the failure halting progress entirely.
Yes. I feel like D&D has someone. I actually feel like very few people always like read to those parts of the DMG though, because they do. It's not. I feel like certain things aren't as explicitly stated either. It's just kind of like sidebar, like maybe don't make things stalemates where your players don't know what to do. So I think people kind of skim past those parts sometimes, because I do think that's the thing is failure can be interesting and can be fun, and it could also be a pain in the butt if you have someone running a game who's just like, nope, you don't break the door down, and it's like, okay, guards don't chase you into the next room where you discover a secret that you were kind of looking for or maybe didn't even know about. You know, there's so many ways to make it more fun.
Right. Now, Math Guy Dave in chat is making a reference about the fact that Linda and I, last night on twitch.tv/arcademark, just had an episode about the entire 1 hour episode was all about failing forward and like how to incorporate those in Pathfinder, D&D, and other games that don't explicitly require it to be on every check. Because there's some games like, Mouse Guard, Burning Wheel, where it's just like, yes, you will fail forward. That is just what's going to happen.
And I do think that right there is kind of one of like the big plugs to play other systems and to also be a player. Like I'm a big believer, and that's one of the reasons I play so many different games, even if it's just a one shot or two, is because certain systems put a lot more emphasis on things like failing forward, but that doesn't mean you can't bring that to games who never even mention it. And I think it's just one of those very good DM skills is to play as many things and to be a player, so you can also see like, okay, this moment kind of sucked as a player, like I have to make sure to try to avoid that in my games, or this GM handles this issue in a very interesting way, I'm going to yoink that and start doing that.
Yeah, learn what's good. And don't reinvent the wheel, which is a computer science programming technique that is also true for game design. That's when you see a GM that does something cool, you can grab it and do that. When you see a new game system that does something cool, you can probably extrapolate that and use that to improve your game in other systems too.
Yeah, and that's what I've been pulling videos. I've been making little kind of like steal this mechanic videos, and I never realized how many people do treat TTRPGs as a board game. Like, no, this is this set of rules. You don't deviate from it. And I think like the beauty is all of these different games are just scaffoldings, and you can kind of create, like I said, a Franken game. You can create the things that work for you and your table and the types of experiences you're looking to have.
Absolutely. And just like as a game designer, that's just how game designers look at the world. That's how we look at everything. It's just like these are pieces, building blocks that can be put together in different ways. These are different lenses and ways of seeing the world or the game. that you have to understand all of those. And
Yeah.
one of those lenses is the board game-ish lens, but that's only
Yeah.
one out of like 100 different ways to look at things.
Yeah, and that's what like I think it's just one of those things like getting comfortable with playing with things and again getting comfortable with being wrong with the concept of failure of like making the wrong call, trying something that you actually didn't really like in the end and then being like, "Hey guys, can we change this?" or "Hey guys, going forward, can we handle this way?" Like it's okay to talk to your players like humans.
You won't learn, really, you probably won't, without failing a few times. Because if you only, everything you do is always successful, you're not
Yeah.
going to figure out why it was successful. Whereas as soon as you get one of those failures, like Stephanie was talking about, where it just kind of was not the right call, you've now been able to isolate something. It's like, oh, maybe you're not exactly sure why it wasn't the right call. Maybe you are, but you're getting closer to understanding your group, your own GMing style, and just maybe some game design principles in general.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what just being comfortable with all of that. Like, no one can be right. No one can get it right 100% of the time. Like, it's okay.
Yeah.
It's just science. It's feedback. It's feedback from running the game. And that's what I actually explicitly, if I try something new, I always ask my players. I'm like, okay, that's what with combat. It's like, for people, that's when they mention it. I'd at least like to have zones. Like, they don't need a full blown grid, but they have a hard time imagining how many enemies, like, where their player, like, character skills would be best utilized. So it's oh, if they would have only known they had to move up 2 zones and then they would have been able to like, sword fight 8 of these guys, then they would have done that. So just giving them enough information visually to help them decide that type of thing.
Yeah.
But it's like, yeah, I just ran like straight theater of the mind and then ask for feedback. Like, who liked this? What did we like? What didn't we like? And just being someone who is good at taking criticism also is important in a lot of these scenarios because I do think because we put so much of ourselves into our games that we're running and so much like effort and time, I think it's very easy to get a criticism and kind of like lash out or withdraw and be like, "Oh, this person is being mean," instead of communicating wants and needs on their part.
If you set the expectations in advance, it can be easier and easier on you because you're the one asking for it and you know you're going to get some positive, some negative. Another important thing to take into account is your players, most of the time, are extremely good at telling when something feels off, when something feels wrong. Now, they might not be able to figure out exactly what is causing them the problem. And they definitely might not be able to propose a solution that actually would be the best one to fix it for them. And
Yeah.
even if it is maybe not the best with the other variables that are going into the equation. So you have to be willing to experiment a little based on the feedback. Always trust that when they say that this is making it feel off or not good, that part is right. But so when Stephanie gave the example of, well, maybe we can do a zone graph, then that might be the right choice. But maybe you try that, and maybe you try question and answer, where you're like, you just let them ask and be like, we're gonna try question and answer. So you can ask me like, are there any enemies that I could like move up to? Where are they clustered? And you'd be like, well, if you kind of go over to like the northwest a little bit, there's 8 guys, and you'll be next to all of them. Oh, but if you went northeast, because you guys are in the south, there's only one guy over there, but it's an archer, and so you might be able to get in their business. And there's also a mage, but it's too far away for you to reach right now. If you go straight north, that's the closest on your path towards it.
Yeah, and that's what like whenever I run theater of the mind, that's why I try to start helping them think that way. So one of the things I do sometimes, especially with newer players, is I do start to list things like if you're interested in taking out the mage, it'll probably have to be next turn because they're too far away. But if you wanted to do an area of attack spell, you can do that from here without getting close to this group of goblins. So I'll like offer up concepts and then they have a bit of working like reference to be like, oh, actually, what if I tried this? Does this hit that group?
Absolutely.
So that's, yeah.
A back and forth with
offering
questions
up.
can help.
Yeah.
And you might find that works better than the zone graph, or maybe you need both, or maybe the zone
Yeah.
graph works better and the questions just with your group take forever. Do you have like 20 back and forth, and it's like, okay,
Yeah.
by this point we should have done something else. It is something that is unique, and it doesn't mean anything wrong about your group if maybe both of those don't work and you have to try another thing. It's just
Yeah.
it's
It's
communication
just
between people.
feedback. It's iterating. Yeah. Like it doesn't mean anything's wrong or bad. It's just iterating and finding what works for you guys. And that's what every
Absolutely.
group is unique.
And so basically the way it comes down to things with rulings is you want to find you're basically like an experimental scientist, and you are gathering data, good or bad, about these rulings every time you make one. So if you let people know also, especially if your group is kind of newer than you are and they don't know when you're making these calls whether it was a ruling or whether it was just flat out in the book, you might be like, especially if you're less sure of it, you might be like, okay, so I'm gonna rule this way this time, and we might revisit it later, but I think this is gonna work for us right now. And if you let people know it's tentative too, then that makes it easier
Yeah.
to change it later.
Yeah, for sure. Because that's what otherwise, if people are like, okay, this is the way we're going to do it, I built an entire character thinking it was going to be this way, especially if it's like what was to them a big choice and you have no idea that they are feeling this way, then it opens up that door for communication. That's what I think a big thing is keeping that door open and making everyone feel comfortable enough to give that input so that you know how they're feeling.
Yes, and you need to understand how your group communicates and how your group gives feedback and what they're comfortable with doing. So in the chat, we had a comment from Sticky that they asked for feedback, but they never get true criticism, just nice things. Now that could just be Sticky's group loves every last possible thing about the gameplay. So I don't want to like create anxiety that there's some secret bad thing going on
Oh
when I
gosh.
say this, but I'm still going to use it as an example because it could also mean that their communication style is that they're not really comfortable with talking about what they didn't like in front of you to your face or with their name associated with it. And you
Yeah.
might find that your group is more comfortable if you make a Google form that's anonymous where they can put the feedback, and then they're more likely to tell you what they actually didn't like at that point because it's not in person, face to face, and you can't exactly tell who said what when they
Yeah.
said it.
And that's what I send out a link to one every like handful of sessions because that's what some people are more conflict avoidant and don't like face to face talks. Or sometimes like I know I'm kind of a strong personality. Like I don't take criticism poorly, but I just know that I'm a very direct person and that can be intimidating to some people and they might not want to have the conversation like that. So that's what I always keep one open and then resend it every couple of sessions, being like, hey guys, like feedback time. I also do at the end of every session stars and wishes. Because sometimes if one of the braver people will be like, I don't think this worked out that well for me, sometimes people who wouldn't have said it will then be like, yeah, I have this input to give. And then it's a lot easier for them since someone got the ball rolling on the topic to like have that discussion.
Exactly. And you need to figure out which form factor your group is going to use because maybe they won't tell you to your face. Maybe you try the Google form and nobody even fills that out at all. Whereas at least they were giving you some feedback, just not any of the negative to your face, and you figure out, oh, my group doesn't like using Google Forms. Okay, let's try something else. And you can just keep trying different form factors, and you will probably eventually find one that is like sort of the zeitgeist that your group communicates with best. And then you can keep using that.
And I do think wording is an important thing because, again, I'm a pretty direct person and I actually do really well with people who are direct, so I'm not likely to get offended by people. But, you know, it's one of those things where it's like, hey guys, what do we feel like worked well for us? Like, inclusive group words sometimes make a difference. Being like, do you guys think we should try something else? Like, giving like alternative options once again, it's just like finding ways to open the conversation sometimes really is the hardest part. And some people really are honestly just happy to play anything at any table and will never have a complaint or a wish to have included, and that's also okay.
Yeah, if you can phrase things that might be seen as more negative more positively, it can help. Where you're just like, I'm always looking to improve my jamming, so I'd really like it if you could tell me what any weak points in this last session so that I can get better. That's different than if you're like, I spent 10 hours on this session, working really hard to give you guys what I thought you wanted, but is there anything that you think that I just completely failed and just made you miserable and unhappy, even despite all that time and effort I put into it?
And I've been a player at those tables, and I'm a direct person, and I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole because I also am like, yep, I'm keeping the peace. This doesn't feel like an earnest conversation we're having. That's terrifying, and I'm gonna be like, nope, this was fun. Goodbye.
So you can see how you're phrasing your communication, just like your group has their own way of communication, can really either stifle or encourage getting more feedback on these adjudicated rulings, or really anything that you're doing in your game session.
Yeah, but that's what anonymous forums are really, really great. I was gonna say, I don't think I've ever had anyone say something that hasn't been said in a session. But my group also does hate forums, and I love forums. So that's what I try to do them. I call it my quarterly form. So that's what it's every handful of sessions, since one of my main groups, my main in-person group, is every like 2 to 3 weeks of play. So that's it, like every third or so. It's about time for my quarterly time to harass them with forms.
Yeah, my main home group will never fill out forms, so I use that as an example. Like, if you tell them to do something in between the session, they essentially never will do it.
Yep. Anytime someone levels up my home group, I'm like, okay, if you want to level up your character, come like 20 to 30 minutes before we start. I'll be here, because every single time all of them come and do that. Only one or two people, I think, actually do it ahead of time. And are just there to kind of like talk about choices.
Now, your group's very similar to mine, but with my group, instead what I do is I tell them the time that was 20 to 30 minutes before is when it's starting, and if there's the one person who always levels up in advance, I just tell them, hey, it's actually starting 30 minutes after that. You can come then, because we're going to level up at the other time that I told everybody else that we were starting, because they're not going to have leveled up.
But I always say my games are like low-key dinner parties, because I always have snack spreads and stuff. So level up day is almost always bigger spreads. So they always show up to see what sort of choices other people are taking, and might kind of tweak their build since they have 30 minutes to sit there and have snacks. But yeah, no, that's what. Luckily, they're timely people.
That's good. That's definitely good. I am definitely one of the timely people in my group in general, because I guess my family always was just like, we have to get to places on time, and so I'm always like, oh my gosh, it's the time.
See, I'm the opposite. My mom was late everywhere we went, and I hate everyone like honing in on you when you walk in somewhere last. So I'm like 20 minutes early. I have to sit at the end of the street if I'm going to someone's house, so I'm not the weirdo sitting out there. It's the anxiety of being late.
Yeah, no.
But yeah, no, that's what different people like, different avenues of communication. That's what that person who's like, oh yeah, I'm trying so hard and you guys have things to complain about, they might think they're being chill and soliciting feedback. That just might be who they are. Yeah. And so that's what giving as many avenues as possible, as many opportunities, makes it a lot easier to kind of get a game where everyone feels like they're on the same page and enjoy, or at least can respect why a ruling is some way, because sometimes people aren't happy with something, but they can understand where things would spiral out and then not be fun for other people. So yeah, no, it's a good way, just having multiple avenues of communication.
Yeah, because if you don't use enough communication to really understand where each of your players is and what they want and what you want, may have to do some introspection on that too. You could wind up getting stuck in what seems to be like it seems to be good, but it's really just at the local optimum. And maybe if you had moved a little bit away from this local optimum, it would have gone down for a bit, but then you find this other space somewhere that is way better for everyone that just required a little bit of adjustment and a little bit more understanding.
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier, is not being afraid to experiment with things. And that's what, even when things are good, because that's what, like, I change things that we don't have problems with at my table because I just want to see how it goes. And yeah, no, it's fun because then you might find that way better moment. And that's always a really cool feeling also as like a GM to get to be like, cool, we found something even better.
Yeah, game designers are those reckless scientists where it's just like, scientists were so, or the game designers were so worried about whether they could that they didn't stop to think about whether they should.
No, I totally agree with that. And that's what, like, I just think it's one of those things where it makes sense to me why I quickly fell into GMing, because that's what I love, science, and I love these little loops of things. That's what, like, I'm very into cooking because I'm very into science. And it's science you can eat. But yeah, no, I just love those feedback moments. I love tinkering with things, and I think a lot of players are actually kind of into it too, as long as they feel like their opinions are valued. They don't like being steamrolled. They like to have input, but they're usually just as game to try new things if you give them the chance to be like, yeah, no, this sucked. We don't like this.
If they're coming along with you, and if they feel the ground is relatively solid around them, even if they're stepping forward. To use a metaphor from my previous example, that they didn't just walk 20 feet forward when there was a cliff 10 feet away. And that's one of the reasons why knowing the baselines of what you're doing and giving them some idea of what to expect is so important, because that can allow your players to be more daring with you and know that you've decided to be more daring this time, but there is a stable fundamental place for them to come back to, and it's not all sort of this wobbly Jenga tower with 40 pieces removed.
Yeah, no, I totally agree.
So,
but yeah, no, that's what, like, I think I also think that some players are more proactive about their feedback and finding issues, because one of the things with the DMG, I think improvise damage is pretty low, and I feel like that, like, I think it usually recommends like 1d6 for something like throwing a rock, but then I feel like me and a player were talking about it, and I feel like that's a bummer, because if you want to encourage creativity in solutions, and that's what I'm someone, as you've seen, as a player, I'm like, yes, give me weird solutions, give me something other than hit something until it dies. So I like to reward things like that. So I'm like, okay, if you're fighter and bludgeoning damage would normally be this D8, like, why can't that rock be a D8? Why can't you give it an equivalent of another attack? Their instinct is still to attack, just in a more interesting, fun, cinematic way. And that's what, at my table, I have a tendency to like to reward cinematic moments in a lot of games. I play with lots of cinematic groups.
It could be like a sling stone that doesn't have as long of a range because they didn't have like the way to sling it around.
Yeah. And so just like not being afraid to even change things that are in the book with player input.
Yeah. So there's a follow-up question, and I may be being post-lawed on this question because I'm not sure if this was a serious question or if this was just a tongue-in-cheek question that is talking about GMs who are willing to go along with anything. Because Anon in chat said, who cares if they're complaining short of actual abuse? If they're returning night after night, you're doing enough right. So I'm going to say I disagree with this enough that I'm not sure if it's actually a joke or serious. But if it's serious,
I
then
feel like it's definitely a little tongue-in-cheek, and
I'd
say you're not playing at a bad enough table if you do not know that it is not good enough.
Yes. So I'm going to take it seriously at the risk of being joked, because I think it would, if I just immediately treat it as a joke only, then that would be worse if it wasn't. So if you're at a table and they're complaining, they're not actually abusing you, but they're complaining they're not having fun, they are returning night after night, I think that you are not doing enough. You want to try to improve that, because this is a lot of hours of your time and their time. And
I do think players will show up for things other than the game, because I play in games that are like, with other people I know. So I'll still show up for social hour because I love having fun with friends. And it's fun enough because of our little inside jokes and side conversations, but I still might not be appreciating the game that much.
yeah.
And then I also feel like you're cheating yourself in those moments. Again, it's like that person's probably joking, that's fine. But for people who do truly feel that way, you are cheating yourself of improving. Because I think that's kind of one of my personal GM manifestos is I am always trying to learn more. I'm always trying to find something I can do better. Like, I'm a huge nerd, so I took notes on my first 15 sessions of games I ran because I could feel things. Like, I could feel the pacing wasn't I wanted. I could feel that this wasn't as cinematic of a combat or something fell flat during it. And so I'm someone who I took notes because I knew in between things it's easy for people to say, oh yeah, I had fun, oh yeah, this and this, and I'm like, I knew there were things without anyone needing to tell me.
Yeah.
But
like,
yeah, that's it. Like,
if you're spending hours every week for a 3 out of 10 experience for you and the players will sometimes come back to that, but I think you owe it to yourself and the players to try to improve that 3 out of 10 experience to be better than 3 out of 10. Even if it's not 2 out of 10 or 1 out of 10 and they're literally like abusing you during the session.
Yeah, I'm very competitive and I want to be the best GM people have had. So I'm like, I don't understand the concept of good enough, but I am weird like that. I competitively, I say competitive grocery shop, where if we walk in the door at the same time, I want to be out of that store before you. I'm an insane person. So I feel like most people should aim for at least like what, 7 out of 10.
I mean, it'd
Try to
be
be
ideal
really
if it's
fun.
at least 6 out of 10, so it's above average.
Yeah. But there's so many reasons to show up to a table, but I want my game to be one of them.
Right. So we had a super chat question from Dire Den. How do you handle combat turns and improvisation with super descriptive players who have great ideas and are completely busting the action economy? Like, I've seen that before. I've seen a player who tried to describe what they wanted to do, and it was very clearly 3 entire turns worth of stuff. So what I'll generally try to do there on my end is I'll be like, I see what your plan is there. That seems like a good overall plan. Now, you're not going to be able to do all of that in one turn. But here's what we can get to on the first turn. And if it seems like it's timely, like it's like, okay, there's an enemy and they're about to complete a ritual on their next turn. So obviously I can't spend 3 turns doing all of this because I want to move forward 3 times my movement speed, then leap into the air, jump and swing on a rope, which takes me onto a boat that was 3 more times my movement speed away, after which I leap onto a dolphin, and the dolphin hops into the air, and I shoot 3 fireball spells at them, and then jump down, kill 5 people with my sword, and then swing their heads around like a sling and disrupt the ritual, and I'd be like, okay, so you probably can't do that in one turn. What is the minimum result? You want to disrupt the ritual with a sling? Maybe instead of doing all that, you pick up a skull that's nearby and sling that to disrupt the ritual. You could do that in one turn. So
yeah, that's what I usually look for. First, the thing I look for is intent, and I always want to be like, hey, that sounds really cool in cinematic. Like, I like to, like, reward the thoughts, reward the creativity. So that's what, again, I also always lean towards doing that first. And then I do like to offer them an alternative that would probably not be as cool, but still accomplishes the general vibe of what they want. Or one of the things I do, since D&D's action economy is a little different, sometimes what I do is if another player is going up soon, I ask them if it's like, okay, if anyone nearby could assist you by taking care of X, we'll have them roll first, but then you roll, and it can be kind of, I do combo moves is something I allow. Again, that's very improvisational, but then it's like, okay,
I mean, I allowed that in the game you were playing when when Anto was just pulling up other people onto the higher roof to help them make an easier climb.
And that's what, like, I'm like, okay, yeah, like, so it's not in the turn order that we have for this initiative, but it's like it's all happening concurrently. So as long as it's someone like nearby, I'm like, yeah, of course you can try to do something cool. It just might look a little different than your initial proposal. Because I
Ironically,
feel like
Pathfinder
again, most
is actually
yeah.
more flexible on that because it does allow some out of turn shenanigans, and D&D, to make it easier and simpler, does not have you mess around with initiative a lot.
And that's where it's one of those things where, like, I get that it's hard when you're in a group of different needs. Some people are strict rules people because I'm lucky enough to have players that fall more into my camp of if you have good intent, I'm probably going to give you a way to try something. And it's like, yeah, they don't have official rules for things like that and don't really plan on you doing that, but it doesn't mean that we can't find a way.
Right.
Like that. And again, rules are scaffolding, not board game by the letter things. Although, as I said earlier, board games are also everything's scaffolding to me.
Yes. And Dire Den mentioned scaffolding before too as a good way to look at stuff, but
Yeah.
everything's scaffolding and everything's also conversation, and in some ways a negotiation. When you're improvising
Mm-hmm.
something that's off the menu,
Yeah.
so to speak, maybe it's not a negotiation because they just say something very vague and then you just tell them exactly what you think it should be and they're like, yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
But if the player themselves is describing an obviously off the books thing that uses way too many actions or whatever it is, that's a starting point for conversation. And
Yeah.
you come back to them with like, well, it'll take this many rounds, or and you can do this much, or
Yeah.
maybe not that, but how about this? And you can get something that works.
And I feel like so many of those players are usually people who are newer to the game that like propose kind of like super wild things. And I really like to harness that creativity. So that's what like I don't want to squish it. So that's what like I really try to find ways to work with them on their vision. Like you said, collaborating. Not just like yes, no, nothing in between.
Yeah, I want to let them
Uh
do the cool thing that they are doing while not building up resentment for the other players who are like taking the appropriate number of actions, being like, well, there's three of us and we each got one turn for a total of 3 turns. And then there is Bob who got 3 turns every turn because he always just is so excited that he asked for 3 turns worth of turns
yeah.
and then the GM keeps giving it to Bob. And so
But
he's
see,
like
in
half the
some
party at this
ways,
point.
I think sometimes that trains other players because I do think kind of how we run monsters and villains and stuff can train them because I definitely have players who are much more I know how to play D&D or Pathfinder. I know I can do X, Y, or Z. Then you have these other players who are asking for sometimes a little far out, but where you can work with them, meet them in the middle. But also something I do with Theater of the Mind Combat because I do like creative solutions is I will have monsters that pick up a barrel, and it's like I didn't exclusively talk at length about whether or not they're barrels, but we're in a tavern. So then sometimes I'll get a player being like, hey, can I throw a chair at them to try and like hurt them but also knock them over? Like getting that intent read really helps me. So sometimes having 1 or 2 sessions of kind of that friction and discomfort of like, okay, this person's trying all sorts of crazy things. Sometimes that can be beneficial. Like, okay, you guys can also try things. And that sometimes is like one of those topics I'll have. I'll be like, hey, I'm actually really trying to reward this. Or sometimes what I'll do is someone does something like that, I'll give like a group inspiration. I'll be like, that was really cool, especially if I had to split it between 2 people. If I'm like, if this person can assist you by trying X, we'll let this happen. Like, that's a really cool idea. Everyone gets inspiration.
Absolutely.
Because that's how we let things happen and what we reward can kind of show players like, hey, you can do more.
Right. And I think that it's a very important topic and one that you need to get on the page with your group about. What is the definition of a creative use of the
Yeah.
rules? What does that mean? Because Anon said in chat that they don't like in Pathfinder, they think it punishes lateral thinking because you can't do creative use of the rules. But I let Stephanie do tons of creative stuff in Pathfinder, and it was fine because it was a creative use of the rules, but it fit with the schema of adjudicating things and improvising in Pathfinder. Whereas to me, if I give that example of Bob who's doing 3 turns worth of stuff every turn, and your response is, that was just a creative idea, that wasn't abuse of the rules, I would say that is abuse of the rules because they're getting 3 turns, but there was
For
also
sure.
some creative stuff in there that we can harness without giving Bob 3 turns.
Yeah, for sure. And that's what, like, I do think so much of it, again, is GM and player dependent. And that is hard because I have people who are friends that were probably not good matches at the table. And that's okay. Like, not everybody is the right fit for you, but that can be hard because there's more tied up in it than simply rules. Because I know there's lots of people that think D&D is a horrible system for creativity, and I don't think any of my players at my table feel that way because I'm someone who is more likely to be like, okay, once again, earnestness, not Bob 3 turns.
Right.
But like Ernest trying to do something interesting, I'm almost always going to, like I said, err on the side of yes or how something can happen.
Exactly. It comes back to the idea of expectations and setting something that's stable. If you let Bob know and show maybe Bob is not just trying to get 3 turns. Maybe Bob really doesn't understand that he's trying to get 3 turns because he's new.
Yeah.
And maybe he's full of creative ideas and occasionally he tries to get 3 turns and you can just show him by being like, yes,
Maybe
yes,
Bob
to the
should be
ones
a
that aren't
DM
3 turns.
instead.
And then with the ones that are 3 turns, you pair them back, and eventually Bob might be like, okay, I've started to figure out when I was taking 3 turns. I'm still
where
giving
that
creative
sweet
ideas.
spot is. Yeah. Yeah, there is middle ground. It's that spectrum. There's somewhere in the middle that is going to work for everyone.
Yeah.
But that's the same thing. There's like some DMs who are literally just going to go by the book and who are very rules focused. And if this system does not have a rule by that, they're just going to say no. And you have to decide whether you're someone who wants to play at that table at the end of the day, which is a much harder conversation to have, in all honesty. Like, that's way harder than trying to find the middle ground, but it's a real part of playing, and it sucks, but it's real.
Yeah, if you're gonna leave the table, that gets you to some of the more drastic options. And Linda and I did an episode fairly recently with a picture of rocks fall, everyone die on it. It's called Drastic Measures, and that is all about. That's what that topic's all about, because sometimes you have to take the drastic measure, but that's a big escalation, and you don't want to go there unless you have to go there and you've tried everything else.
Yeah, it's hard, and that's what, like, some people are just suited for certain types of games, like more war game type things, and that is fine. But yeah, it's everyone being on the same page, because if one person is going in thinking they're gonna get a lot of roleplay, you get disappointed.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of
hard.
roleplay versus combat, it looks like Sticky has a question for us. Have either of us ever run a campaign or one-shot that had no combat at all? I'm assuming that they mean in D&D or Pathfinder a combat-heavy system.
Oh, for sure. I don't think I've had anything with 0 combat, but that's because I have players who enjoy combat. And so that's one of those things. I have a video on my YouTube about pre-questionnaire surveys, and I do play with a lot of people who enjoy combat, and that's okay because I think you can do them in very role-play centric ways. But I do think I could run something without combat, because no combat doesn't equal no conflict. And I do tend to lean towards, like, my own storytelling style leans towards low combat. Like, it's definitely something that is always on the table, but it's more if a player escalates it to it. I have very few, this is a planned thing you are almost definitely going to run into. Very, very few of those.
Yeah, I have run single sessions, but not entire lengthy campaigns that had no combat in D&D or Pathfinder, a combat-heavy game. I have also run things in other systems that do not emphasize combat, that didn't have combat, but that's an easier way to say yes to. But I've definitely run sessions that didn't, for sure. And like Stephanie, I run quite a few sessions that only had a few. Sometimes it's a dungeon and there's lots and lots of fights, but a lot of times it's just like No, only for this one or two things with very hefty narrative stakes where
Yeah.
it's like, no, we're going into a fight for this.
Yeah. And that's exactly how I do it, where it's like, cool, you're trying to steal the queen's child. I don't know. I don't know why that was
I
my
don't know
thing.
why they were
But
doing
yeah,
that, but
you're kidnappers now.
yes,
Good luck.
apparently we're kidnappers. And maybe you get out of it scot-free because you did a great infiltration, but
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
maybe we
if you
ran the
mess
infiltration
anything up,
system.
someone's gonna fight you about this. Like, someone's not
Yeah,
gonna let you walk off with like this tiny baby. So yeah, no, that's it's always there's always the chance of no combat, but there's
right.
also always the chance. So a lot of mine is completely player dependent and or dice roll dependent.
So yeah, if Stephanie's in my game and she wants to kidnap the prince for some reason, and we'll do an
Kidnappers.
infiltration. I'll probably like have like awareness points that are building up every time she doesn't ace it. Be like, okay, we'll fail forward. So you get through the defenses, but their awareness is building up, and when it reaches certain points, that'll increase the patrols. That'll increase the number of combats from 0 possibly to multiple. Because if it gets too high, it'd be like, no, they're in the room when you get there with the prince.
Yeah,
And
they're
there's also another group that's going to attack you after you beat that group before you can get out. Maybe there's 2 combats now, and there could have been 1 or 0 combat if you were just in and out like a thief in the night.
yeah. But yeah, that's what I have a tendency to kind of do things like that. Like in your example, where it's sure it could be avoided. Sometimes it's luck, sometimes it's choices. But yeah, that's it. By I have not chosen to have combat as not an option as a GM. Like, I don't ever take anything off the table because that's what something like that. I'm like, of course you'd be in a fight. Like, and that's what, at the end of the day, some of these where the players take something, it's like someone would be opposing you at this point. They wouldn't just be like, cool, good luck, bye, Prince, I hope you have a nice life.
Yeah. And Anon asks, how often are our, quote, potential combats resolved without killing or fighting the antagonist in a different way?
Very often for me, actually. I reward this in players, so if they can diffuse it. I also, in my combat design, I almost every single combat I run has alternative stakes. So it's something like retrieving an item, escaping this. So it's not necessarily straight fighting something. So that is always, again, an option because I do have players that are martial based and they want to sometimes just beat the crap out of something, and that is okay, and I am also into it. But yeah, that's what death doesn't always have to be an option, and I have very narrative focused games. So I have players who I will ask them, I'm like, are you knocking this person out? Are you going to kill them? So that I put that ball in their court so they can start thinking more about stuff like that, about alternatives to like hit it till it's dead. But yeah, I definitely give them lots of chances to diffuse or to accomplish something, get out of there, just because it makes it more fun to me.
Yeah. I try to have antagonists who are, they understand what they want to do and they're willing to make a deal if the PCs are. Sometimes I've had one situation where there was this one bad guy and it was in a published adventure, but I was mixing things around a bit, and I had a player who wanted to play like a somewhat uncommon ancestry, that one of the villains was like also from that ancestry but half
Ooh,
demon.
okay.
And it was like this wizard went up into the North Pole and the demons caught him, and then one of them had a kid with him, and it's this villain, and she was very mistreated, and they said her family hated her. So this person wanted to be a wizard from that same uncommon ancestry. I was like, okay, in that case, your father could be a wizard named X. I gave the name. She was like, okay, sure. And so then it wound up being the half sister of the player character. And the problem is that because of like all the abuse and being indoctrinated in a demon cult, this NPC wanted to kill thousands of people, sacrificed to the demons. But she also, I thought, was going to kill the party because of the fact that she was just dissing her father because the cult told her that her father abandoned her, even though really they just killed him.
Yeah.
And so she was really ragging on her father, but the half sister just like kind of let her do that, even knowing it wasn't true, and just took her side and tried to be nice to her, and was just like, okay, yeah, you
Yeah,
can
you're
kill
right
those
to be
thousands of people
angry.
to your demon. That's fine. We can be a family. That's gonna be okay. We're trying to save hundreds of thousands of people from an evil regime. And so they actually created an alliance, but then after that, some of the PCs who were like more goody two shoes were just feeling real bad about letting her sacrifice thousands of people to a demon, and they eventually convinced some of the neutral people who had like not taken a side to switch. And so they then turned around after going a week past that, turned back, and then
No.
did attack the half sister. And the player of the half sister is like, well, I'm not gonna fight you, but I'm not gonna help you to fight my half sister.
That's intense.
And so they
Oh
met.
man.
Yeah, they wound up killing her. So they didn't fight her, but then they fought her. So then the player character of the half sister like went to one of those goody two shoes characters like much later, and like kind of tricked her into teaching a ritual that would allow her to call back the spirit of someone who was dead that she claimed was for a different reason that was related to what the party was trying to do, because they were going into a forest of
Yeah.
spirits. And then she used it to call back her half sister and like make a deal with her, like not to get revenge if she like brought her back to life, and to help them out, and that she would let her go back and kill the thousands of people that she always wanted to kill afterwards. But she was thinking, maybe if I'm nice to her, she won't, and she has to do these things for, maybe she won't feel that she has to kill those people then. So it was like a whole long plot line. And these kind of things are kind of common when you allow multiple options and multiple possibilities, and not just fights.
And that's what, like, I think that's such a great highlighting of like our roles as GMs to kind of take what our players want to do and see how we can make it work. Because it's like that player obviously didn't want them to kill her half sister. But it's like, how can both things be honored? And that's the conundrum. Like every once in a while it's really hard to make it work, but I don't know. That's what I love. That's why I love GMing, is how do you make it work?
Exactly.
It's the fun part. How do you make this all fit?
And the player's half-sister, because she was the demonic half-sister, could disguise. So she disguised. No one knew that. She's like, I found this random spirit caller in the forest who happens to be the same class as my evil half-sister. But that's, there's a lot of people with that class.
Yeah.
And nobody figured it out. They were like, oh, okay. You took the leadership feat, I guess. That's fine. Whatever. And then at the end of the campaign, she's like, by the way, that was my half-sister. I brought her back to life.
But see, I love that because it's like one of those moments that could have sucked for one player. And especially with like expectations, you're like, but this is part of my storyline. It's like, I don't want them to die. And you found a way for both players that wouldn't have let it stand and for her to have things. Like, I love meeting in the middle.
Exactly.
It's very creative problem solving. That's solid.
Trying to figure out how to reconcile two irreconcilable positions with some kind of compromise, and we let it like be questionable, like whether Lisi convinced her sister like not to go back and kill the people that she was gonna kill at the end.
I love that, like movies without endings that are like, sorry, spam calls, fun. Yeah, like it's kind of like when movies don't answer all of the questions. I know some people hate that, but I'm one of those person, like I love to just kind of sit there and ruminate on what I think happened after everything was over. So I love things like that. Just big question marks where I can speculate for the rest of my life.
Yeah. And Non says meeting the expectations of everyone at the table is the biggest conundrum for a GM. And that's why communication is so important. Because you are one of the people whose expectations has to be met as well.
Yeah, for sure. And that's what, like, thinking that you have to do it all alone is also one of those things where it's like you can talk to the player with the half sister and be like, what do you think is a satisfying way? Because players have lots of cool ideas too. But yeah, no, you count. Sometimes people think they're just there to kind of keep everything moving, but what you want counts too. And that's hard to remember sometimes,
right.
But
it counts. It just doesn't override what the other players want. You just need to take things into account. The GM is one of the players, and people often are like, well, are they? It's not exactly the same. And here's how I heard it from someone, I can't remember who, but I thought it was brilliant, so I'm going to tell you this again. I probably said it on Roll for Combat Live before. So, fingers. Your thumb is a finger. Is definitely a finger. But if you refer to all of your fingers, in some cases you might mean like the fingers that aren't your thumb. Because your other fingers do certain things. Your thumb opposes the other fingers. It's an opposable thumb, just like the GM kind of opposes. They oppose the players, but they're trying to work together. And because of the fact that they have slightly different roles from each other, that allows you to do something that people who did not have this opposable thumb could not do.
I feel like that's a really good analogy.
The best one I've seen for like the question of is the GM a player or not.
Yeah, that's probably the most comparable thing I've heard. Because it's just you're in a different role. You do have a little bit more say, but I think that's also like a burden. That's your responsibility. You need to be very cognizant of that instead of just being like, what I say goes. Just that spirit of collaboration again. That dang spirit. Always working.
So, and then, Dire Den said the creative moments when you have these things going on are more memorable than just a combat that goes to plan. There was a question that said, what would you do for like a survival exploration where like food and water are strictly limited? So I would say first you need to take a look at what the basic spells of your game that you're running this in provide in terms of, if I load up on like create water or create food and drink or those kind of things, how much am I being able to make? And if the answer is way, way, way too much for it to even matter anymore, then you may want to consider running either in a version of the game where like those spells are uncommon and not everybody has them, or for some reason there's a magical reason that you can't do it. For instance, let's say create water is a really easy spell to get. It creates gallons and gallons of water, and you're like, but I want water merchants and deserts and things like that. Like, I guess I don't need them if it's a basic spell anybody can cast. But maybe in your setting, the reason why deserts are deserts, despite water magic being prolific, is because they are closer to the plane of fire, and water spells don't work as well in deserts, and that's part of why they became a desert. And maybe that means you get much less water, or the spell doesn't work, or something like that in this particular desert.
Finding satisfying reasons. Yeah.
And so if you've established that, and again, you don't just pull this on the players later and they expected that their water spells would work and they didn't buy any water skins, it'd be like, come on, my mage would know. If this is a major magical thing that everyone knows because civilizations have attempted to cast water spells there, and that's why it's a desert, my wizard who went to wizard college probably knows that, and it would have actually bought water skins instead of saying, don't buy water skins, I can just create gallons of water. So, assuming that they're in the world and they know that, and they're a part of that, then that can be a way to get started on the resources. Another way you might want to do it, if you don't want to make it take like hours looking at like very specific rations and water, is maybe you can abstract the supplies and resources into like resource points that include all the food and water and other supplies that they need, and create multiple uses for resource points, like set up a camp. You need a certain amount each day per person for provisions, and then there's like a scrounge is a thing you can do on a day to like try to get more resource points, but then that person is not exploring new areas or doing certain other choices, and you give multiple options to play around with. That's my quick answer for that.
I am running exploration weird. This is one of those things I'm toying with because I find kind of exploration hex crawls unsatisfying, as is a lot of the times. It's just not I don't like tracking things. I do not find it fun and exciting for myself. And I know there are lots of people who they are fine with it. They enjoy knowing they have 10 torches and might run out by the time they get to this place. But I'm playing, and I'm probably gonna have a video on this at some point in the future. I'm now like 500, oh my gosh, like 500 videos deep on things, but I am kind of playing with an Oregon Trail inspired like hex thing. I am so sorry. That is my partner calling. I'm so sorry.
So, I'm
But
guessing
yeah, I'm playing.
in the Oregon Trail version that is going to be the one where you take track of provisions.
It's gonna be a lot looser, so I'm gonna have it be more like you're going to stock, your inventory with more torches than this, letting them know you could run out of light before you reach this. Like, kind of having them choose between what they are prioritizing as they head into certain areas with kind of more explicit forms of what might be the outcome and then having kind of encounters related to that. Uh so yeah, I'm playing right now. I just started tinkering with it a little bit and play testing it, but that's what like I'm more interested in what did a group prioritize? What are they risking running out of? What are the consequences? So it's like choice, potential like thing that goes wrong and then playing that out is kind of where my interest in exploration lies more than having to once again it's like I have ADHD. There are certain things where I'm just like tracking things is literally my nightmare. So I was trying to find ways to simplify it and making it more interesting for someone like me who likes the concept of exploration hex crawls but not necessarily all of the things that go into it. So
Right.
yeah, it's like, okay, in this desert, if like water's and thing, do you want to have more water skins, but then are you risking running out of rations? And so kind of having that matrix of player choice so that we can still play it out in a way that's rewarding without having a lot of the things that go into traditional hex crawls.
Right. If the key is to give interesting choices that each have their own benefit. Like in the example I gave, you can choose to scrounge, but then you're not doing something else. And so if each of the options is something that people might want to do, is like, well, we can have lookouts so that we're less likely to be ambushed by random encounters, or we can
Yeah.
search so we can find hidden treasures and resources that are in the area that we might have missed if we didn't do a thorough search. And
Yeah.
you can let each character, while they're exploring, also do an additional a role and be like, okay, so you're moving along, everybody's doing that, of course, otherwise we're not moving forward with the plot if we just say, well, we'll just sit on our butts here and hunt for a long time to
Yeah.
get provisions. But
Yeah.
what else are you doing? Make a choice.
Yeah, no, and that's what I really feel like the feel of exploration to me comes down to like choice, consequence, play it out.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I think that we've covered a lot of what I wanted to definitely get at when it came to improvisational games, gameplay, and also just a lot of cool related topics that I hope people have enjoyed. So, Stephanie, thanks for joining us, and everyone in the
Thanks for
chat,
having
thanks for the
me.
good questions.
Yeah,
And I
this
will,
was a great time.
yes, I will say our traditional ending, which is until next time, if you want to battle the zoo, you have to roll for combat.